protecting staff as they protect the public, service delivery in the COVID era. I'm Mia Hunt, editor of Global Government Forum, the publishing house serving civil servants around the world. Citizens have rarely been in such need of assistance from their governments, with millions dependent on new economic stimulus, benefits and public health services. But governments must find ways of meeting people's needs without exposing their own staff to the risk of infection. The aim today is to examine both the shift to digital services and how to improve safety in face-to-face delivery, whilst also considering how to ensure those services are inclusive and accessible to all citizens. This webinar is run in association with our knowledge partner Dell Technologies, whose support allows us to offer this webinar free to public servants. We have two panellists today, Craig Varian, Director of Estates Finance Group at the UK's Department for Work and Pensions, and Rob Rance, UK Channel Lead for CSG Group at Dell Technologies. The webinar will begin with short presentations from panellists, and then we'll move on to the Q&A session. We've set aside a good chunk of time to answer your questions, so please do click on the Q&A box at the foot of the Zoom window and type in the questions you have in there. I'll keep an eye on it and we'll get through as many as we can after the two presentations. That's all from me for now. We'll go now to our first presentation from Craig Varian. Craig.
Hello everyone, and thank you very much. So as I was introduced, I'm Director of Estates within DWP, and I'm sure many people will know DWP who are listening in today. But for those of you who don't know and maybe want a bit of background to who we are, we employ around 85,000 people. We have millions of citizens who use our services, from pensioners to those who use universal credit, housing support, etc. Around 20 to 23 million people use our services, and in an average week in normal times we might have 1.5 million people visiting our job centre network, which many people will be aware of. Across the country we have over 800 buildings, and that's all the way from the north of Scotland all the way down to Cornwall, and to keep that operation going in, as I say, normal times is a huge operation. We have thousands of people within our supply chain. From a facilities management perspective, we have thousands of security guards, and we have budgets to deal with things like life cycle work, projects, etc., to keep our buildings open. And a large part of what we do is being embedded within communities right across the country, and having those lights on is important, both for our colleagues, but absolutely for the people who come and visit our sites every single day. So when COVID hit, probably like lots of other organisations who absolutely have a delivery model which is focused on face-to-face interventions, we had massive operational issues to deal with. Overnight, we went from dealing with claimants on a daily basis, claim commitment, etc., where we'll be dealing with people who are on a regular basis and having that work coach involvement, and we had to pivot our 85,000 people to make sure that we could deal with the increase in claims. And we got, just to give us a sense of scale, that from March through to September, through to the summer, we had an increase in around about 2.9 million claims. So a huge workload increase for colleagues right across DWP. And for those who weren't essentially in frontline roles, they were moved onto frontline services, and we moved a large portion of that into digital and telephony type services, so dealing with claims that came through that method. But throughout it, we've had to keep our doors open for the people who are most vulnerable and those who can't access our digital and telephony services. So there's been two types of operation really at full pelt within DWP. One, which is getting digital equipment to colleagues who previously didn't have it. So again, Surface Pros and other PCs out to people's homes, and there's been thousands that have been delivered across the country so that colleagues could do the work that they were previously doing in a job centre or in a back of house, now at their desk, etc. But at the same time, there was a huge operation to make our buildings COVID safe, or COVID resistant, I should probably say. So ensure that people could work in there safely. And as public health guidance has adjusted, we've had to adjust with it. And often we were one of the few buildings that were open on a high street, and have been open throughout the whole of lockdown. So we've at any one time probably had around about 50,000 people still in our buildings, still doing the work, still doing critical work to ensure that payments are made, and to ensure that those who are most vulnerable have got the support they need. As we move forward, I'm sure many of you will have seen the Chancellor's announcement back in August time that there will be a recruitment drive of 13,500 extra work coaches to deal with potential increase in claimants, and to deal with the fallout from the close down of certain industries during the coronavirus period, and to house those 13,500 people safely, we're having to increase our estates to allow people to do face-to-face interventions. So I suppose ours is a story probably of two halves. One which is doing as much as we can with telephony and digital, whilst also recognising that the support that DWP provides is face-to-face. It's with customers, it's where it does its best work, and therefore ensuring that the workplace we operate is COVID safe. And I think the big challenges there being, as I say, dealing with the public health guidance, which has shifted, and right so throughout the period. So, I can remember right back at the start of March when there was a discussion about whether you need hand sanitizer or not. It seems a long, long time ago, right through to now where we've moved to things like 1 metre plus rules, and ensuring that we've got perspex screens. Those types of things are massive rollouts. We've got 13,500 desks that needed to be screened. That's not just go out, stick a screen on. It's bespoke desks. It's going to the Isles of Scotland. It's getting out to North Wales. It's making sure that the things that you're doing are consistent right across the piece, but provide that safety. At the same time, of course, we're ensuring that people who don't need to be on the estate aren't on the estate. So where we can, getting them the technology that allows them to do it. So today you're seeing me from a mobile phone. We don't have Zoom actually within DWP, but we have gone from a place where, to be perfectly frank, we didn't have much in the way of technology to do lots of the meetings. So when we first went into lockdown, a lot of our meetings were done by telekits. We've adjusted quite quickly through Skype and now onto Microsoft Teams. And I'm sure there'll be further, evolving into different other elements. And that's allowed us obviously to communicate with a wide range of people across the whole of government, which has been important, because this isn't just DWP standing on its own. Whilst we're probably one of the busiest departments in terms of the response, there's obviously other departments that are equally stretched. Most of the government is stretched in some ways, but working with colleagues from Cabinet Office, Treasury, MHCLG, etc., it's been massively important. We've worked very closely with people like HMRC, where if they're not using certain building, because they've been able to provide a digital solution, we've been able to take on that building if we need physical space. So there's been a lot of cross-government working, which I think is something that, used to happen, but this is, I think it demonstrates your friends across government when you're in need. So it's been fantastic in that sense. I think what we've probably seen is probably a huge shift in both the way that we use digital, and probably within 6 months done more than we'd probably done in several years, to get up to where we are in terms of the way we work with Teams and Skype, etc. now. But similarly within our estate, some of the decisions we're taking now in terms of taking on buildings and making decisions with supply chain, etc. Again, huge pace, things that would have normally taken a long period of time to get through the sort of governance are being made quickly. And a lot of that's done with support of ministers, etc. Absolutely recognising the need to get a decision made quickly and then enact on it. And during the midst of lockdown, where the Prime Minister was making almost daily announcements throughout March and April, and the country would tune in at sort of 5 or 6 o'clock to see what was going to be made, that announcement that day. Then there was a huge amount of work that was taking place throughout the day to get to that sort of policy decision. And then once that policy decision was being made in real time, then impacting it on operations, massive operation. And I think I've never been prouder to work for the government and DWP, and some of the achievements that we've made in terms of just keeping the lights on and doing what we needed to do have been extraordinary. Certainly, as I say, within DWP, and I know across the rest of the government. And when you look back now, it almost feels like, you can't remember the impact it was having, but ultimately some of the things that we were having to pivot and do were extraordinary. And now, I suppose we're in that sort of what we call sort of recovery stage to now say, well, what does this look like? And the phrase, the new normal's bounded about a lot, but we have to look at where we are now and say, some of this will be a new normal in terms of the way we operate, and actually how can we use the things that have, I suppose, positively come out of this experience to now influence the way we operate going forward. More than happy to answer any questions throughout this talk, and I know that Rob will be giving his presentation, but from my perspective, very happy to answer anything, both in relation to how we've operated this, what we're looking to do next, and I suppose the sort of big impacts on DWP, certainly from the States and operational perspective.
Thanks very much for that, Craig. That's really insightful, and I'm sure there'll be plenty to discuss during the Q&A session. Before we get to that, we'll move to our second presentation from Rob Rance. Rob.
Thanks, Mia. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. So, Rob Rance, I work for Dell Technologies in the Client Solutions Group, and I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about some of the trends I'm seeing, the conversations I'm seeing. I saw the attendee list. I think I've spoken to a fair amount of the organizations on the list today. So really glad to see you coming out to see us talk through what is next. I think ultimately the strategies that were written down, I think the most I've heard to date is it's in the bin and we need a new one. I've not spoken to anyone, bearing in mind I cross pretty much all verticals here in the UK, so whether it's government, banking, and the NHS and so on and so forth, people do need to or are thinking about their next strategies. So Maria, next slide, please. So not so much doom and gloom, but more of an awareness. You guys may have seen these before. There's been a lot of reporting, but security has become a real huge concern and factor with, and unfortunately in bad times, people do bad things, right? So just the number of increased attacks, remote desktops being unsecure, to Craig's point, right? And I have done a fair amount of work over the last few years with WDP with a good chap called James Irvine. Security is such a high value, and Zoom is one of those issues, right? But it's have you prepared? Are you prepared to protect yourselves in the scams that are out there, right? So we already knew that 90% of the security breaches came from the end user, and now we're standing up thousands of people that used to be connected internally and didn't really think about it. The average office user doesn't really think about external hacks or email scams when they're in an office. The mindset says, I'm in my office, my company protects me. When they're at home, it's almost even worse, right? And I had a colleague not long ago, there was one character out on the email address from a live customer with a PO, and it wasn't a purchase order. It was a phishing attack, and that's how easy it can be done. So do your due diligence. Bring in the specialist to talk to you. I kind of treat it like the old timeshares, right? You always used to get a free lunch to hear about what they said. Go and get your free lunch. Have a little chat about the industry trends. What's out there? What are you using today? How secure is it? And have a little think around what you need in the future to be able to stand up to these attacks that are coming in. Even on my personal email, I see it increasing almost daily with the amount of different types of scams and phishing that's coming through your domains with addresses being sold. So yeah, just a bit of an awareness thing. I'm sure you're all on it. And obviously there are various of technology companies out there that can give you that 99% uptime in secure networks, desktops, laptops, and so on and so forth. So feel free to reach out and speak to a specialist. Yes, please, Maria. So for years now, right, my job has mainly been around talking to customers around their current estate and actually not talking about the device, right? We at Dell Technologies speak to the employee, right? And we also speak to IT. So over the last few years, we've been on this driver around productivity back to IT and uplift in the user and also user satisfaction. And that's the one I want to home in on today. It was always about, years ago, it was about, you know, we only had 2 devices, 2 apps. Then we went and opened up the floodgates and we couldn't control the manageability of those devices and all those apps. And it's about getting it right. But how do you get it right? Well, you come and talk to people about your environment, talk to people about your users' activity. Do you know what your users are clicking? What's their click rate on certain applications? It's very important. Moving forward, it's even more important to talk to your users about their home life. Okay, where you all said, and Craig mentioned it a minute ago, the new norm. It will be to some extent. Okay, there were some crazy numbers being thrown out there about 80% of people in the world will work from home. I think it's fair to say that's probably not going to happen, but I think 40% is probably about right, and we're going to start to see a lot more office sharings, right? So I'm starting to see people talk to their users around, right, 2 days in, 2 days out, shrinking their property estates because they need to reduce costs. Trying not to reduce overheads in relation to staff and redundancies, but maybe reduce their properties so they can keep these people employed. So these are the trends I'm seeing right now, but a lot of the people don't necessarily know how to get there. Next slide, please, Maria. I think it's absolutely critical that we personify our organization. And I'll talk to where Dell have changed theirs since COVID. And for those people that have seen this before, Dell have been working to a personified estate now for about 4.5 years. And you know, our goal in life is to get our customers to be able to deploy and manage their entire estate through their set of personas. So, you know, the way that we build and manage those devices helps you get there. And I think, you know, some of the things that you want to do, whether it's via SurveyMonkeys, whether you get an external company to do it, right now is an absolute key time to talk to your employees. Okay, we all work in and live in different variances. The amount of people that I've spoken to that live in a 1-bedroom flat, and you know, for that 6 months having to do that on your own was really, really hard. And the organizations that were reaching out to those employees and some of the examples I can talk to is Dell, where I work, and some of the things that they've done of late is we can automatically reduce our meetings by 5 or 10 minutes at a click of a button, because the management know that we're all getting caught up from sometimes as early as 6:45, 6:30 in the morning through till 9, 10 o'clock at night, and you've barely had a break for a snack. It's all too easy to be saying yes to calls, yes to Zoom calls, Teams calls, circuit calls, video conferencing. So think about your policies for your employees around what do you like and dislike in your current working home environment. Chances are your staff are probably having those same thoughts, but have you asked? So it's more important today to really think about the plan, next slide please, Maria, of how you're going to get there, right? Personalize the working experience, create those role-based personas. And I'll talk about some of the work we've done in a second around post-COVID and what does that look like. From an IT perspective, how are we managing that? You know, Craig talked about the scale that DWP had to uplift to get devices to, and I've been to a fair few of your sites actually, Craig. They are some interesting locations. And the guys did it. They did a phenomenal job of getting kit to users' hands and getting it turned on to allow social credits to be paid and pensions to be paid and so on and so forth. You know, how are you being more dynamic? What collaborational software have you got in your organization that can allow users to work remotely from a screen to screen? To the point, you know, when you know, people are starting to go back to the office now. Granted, we've got some announcements coming in the weeks, I think, that may change that, hopefully not too much. But what have you got in-house, right? What screens have you got to allow creative people to design on a touch screen? Some of the products that are coming to market in reaction to COVID, and ourselves included, we've accelerated some of our products by a year to help more collaborative working from home with sort of 24-inch style conference screens coming to the market early in the new year. Again, think about how you can simplify and personalize your working experience, be it in an office, on the go, or at home. Next slide, please, Maria. This is live off the press. So the base personas you saw at the beginning, we've been going to people, talking to customers, users globally, and these are some of the types of roles and personas that we feel are coming into play in this working from home, part home, part office environment. So and then gives you the types of manageability and types of roles that would come under each banner. And we're not saying this is complete in any manner. What we're trying to give people is just a visual to work from to help them identify the types of roles that they could lean to in helping them move forward in relation to a personified estate. And ultimately, if you can get there, you don't want to be 12 personas deep, you don't want to be 15, you ideally sort of 3 to 5, but then homing in on those devices and making it right for the user. It's all about the right device for the right user in the right place. And I can't stress that enough. Having 1 or 2 devices in an estate is just not going to suit everybody's needs. It's not going to suit every single job role. And especially now moving forward, when I if I go back to that employee living in a 1-bedroom flat, them having a device with a kickstand, for instance, is not going to be a great experience. They're going to need probably slightly wider keyboards with maybe a built-in keypad, depending on the types of applications they use. They may need a screen. So again, when we start talking technology, are you aware what's out there? Okay, there are many screens in the market now with built-in power out via Type-C, built-in Ethernet sockets that can allow you to maybe look at a home docking scenario without a dock. Okay, so commercially it's stronger and gives the user a better experience. Even a colleague in my own team doesn't have a secondary screen yet, so we're getting him one, right? And I appreciate it's a bit easier for me, it's my business, but think about that. Think about the different types of housing people live in and how they can work. To my extent now, I'm sat at my desk, and we've been quite fortunate because we picked up a puppy last Friday and he hasn't brought down the bookcase while I've been on this call. But these things can happen. What are your employees doing? Do ask them, try and create the right surveys. And there are specialists and organizations like Dell and others in the market that can help you get there. And generally, right, we're not looking to charge you for this. We want to make you more productive and more attractive as you look to retain and attract talent as we move forward. Because that's the next stage, right? Is as we move forward, where are our technological gaps? If we look at the market, we can see that AI is very much driving the way that technology is working in today, right? Even down to our devices and how some of our applications are monitored and so on and so forth. Have you looked out over the next 5, 6, 7 years around what gaps you might have and how you're going to attract those people into your business? I haven't seen any of these questions popped up, but I'm coming towards the end here around what we're looking to do, how we're doing it, some of the trends I've seen, and I think there could be some questions towards the end here that we'll be more than happy to take, and I'm always more than happy to come and speak to customers on a one-to-one basis. I almost said face-to-face there. But whether it's virtual, give you deeper information around some industry data that they'll collect from Gartner, IDC, our own customers, and our own failings as well around what we've tried to deliver over the last sort of 6 to 7 months. When, and to Craig's point, I was heavily involved in things like standing up Nightingale, product supply chain, how we kept things moving in relation to ensuring we could get as many devices to customers' needs in the shortest period of time. And one last stat for you, which may blow your mind, I know it still blows mine, is in that 5 to 6 week period, there was an uplift in demand of 300% for mobility products in the UK, which is just unbelievable. And I look at us and a couple of others of the key players in the market, and everyone really did sort of drop their guard and just get on with it. And in a good old British manner, roll up our sleeves and just get on with it. And it was good to work with my colleagues at other brands and help out the nation to get that and continue supporting some of the government initiatives around IT to children and so on and so forth. So, thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Rob. It's great. Just a reminder for the audience that if you'd like to ask any questions, you can do so by typing it into the Q&A box at the foot of your Zoom window. I'll start with a couple. I mean, there's a lot to cover here. We've got the HR perspective, we've got the technology needed to enable people to work from home effectively, the focus on maintaining service delivery and on what the future holds as well. I want to look first at the HR perspective and keeping employees safe and the return to offices. I was thinking about what's happened in the US, where the Trump administration began trying to get federal employees in some locations back to offices as early as May, June time. There's a lot of concern around that, and indeed a survey found last month that more than 70% of US government staff working on site felt that their agencies weren't doing enough to keep them safe. I think Michael Gove announced this morning that plans to get 80% of Whitehall staff back by the end of the month have been abandoned now, but clearly that will happen at some stage. So Craig, you mentioned that a lot of people have been in offices throughout, but some people have also been working from home. So I just wondered, you know, when you do start getting more people back to offices, how will you avoid putting people at risk and causing anxiety in the workforce? And what are the implications of getting it wrong?
So in terms of capacity, we're at over 90%, but 50% capacity to do with 2-to-1. So in terms of that sort of target, we were already exceeding it by the time that was announced. As I say, thousands and thousands of our staff, about 50,000 of our colleagues are having to go to work every single day. So we're perhaps in a slightly different position than other colleagues who may be in more sort of policy roles, etc., not necessarily customer facing, that can work from home. So from the start, we've had to make sure our buildings are as safe as they possibly can be, and that's been an iterative process. I'm sure there'll be things that we could have done better at the time. There's two parts to it. One, which is actually trying to deliver it, which is in itself incredibly difficult. And then there's a second part, which is around the sort of hearts and minds and around the sort of reassurance. As I say, with a large percentage of our colleagues back at work, that's, I suppose, been difficult at points, especially when there were lots of other messages elsewhere. But I think people have stepped up and been in the sites. We've obviously got different approaches for different people. There's some people who are in the vulnerable or shielding category, and they've had a slightly different approach in terms of going back to work. And similarly, there are people who actually, because of personal circumstance, their home situation or whatever, have actually wanted to be in the office, and we've had to make provision there. So I think from our perspective, we would say we're in a slightly different position to a number of other government departments, and that we've pretty much, as I said, had to keep all 800 buildings operational throughout the whole of this. I suppose the consequences of getting it wrong are actually, ultimately you're making people ill. So that is, the worst thing you could possibly do. Our permanent secretary has been very clear from the absolute start that health and safety is the number one priority. That's my number one priority for both our customers that come and visit us, but of course for the colleagues that are in our offices. So that's number one priority. And if not only are you making people ill, but then ultimately you could lose the goodwill of people who are coming in. And of course put your own business at risk, because ultimately you've got potentially large numbers of people who are affected. So it was a huge, especially at the start when the modelling was being created and they were looking at how many people could potentially be infected. There were big business continuity plans around the fact that what did it look like if a certain number of colleagues were ill at any one time, and we weren't just impacting the impact on the economy, but the impact on our own staff, and that's stayed uppermost in the minds of. I can genuinely say this within our exec team. It's something that I'm pretty much meeting the exec team on every other week or at least once a month to sort of go through where we are on that, providing reports on how we're getting on with everything from cleaning to consumables. I mean, one of the things that has probably come out of this more than ever, and I know it's been talked about, but, you know, sort of heroes that you'd never really heard of before, but, you know, the FM, the cleaners, the people that ultimately now are absolutely critical for providing reassurance and perhaps really didn't get the thing that they deserve. So I think, you know, from my perspective, following the guidance is critical, actually delivering it is critical, but then there's the whole piece around comms and reassurance, and also holding your hands up if you haven't got it quite right and adjusting quickly to make it right. And one of the things that we've done throughout the whole of this is ensure that there's essentially hotlines to the health and safety team to make sure, who've been fantastic throughout this, to make sure that if someone does have a query, that they can quickly phone someone up and say, well, this is going on, or this is an issue, and then it's acted upon. So I think in terms of communications, we've been very open with everything that we possibly know. And then when we've got communication back and feedback, and if it's not working, then we do something differently. I don't think there's any, you know, we are in, you know, again, another term that's used, unprecedented times. We are in a point in time where this has never happened before. So there is a case that you are, you know, again, it sort of sounds like a terrible management cliche, but you're learning organisation, but you're learning at real time. You're learning within 24 hours what the new public health guidelines are, and then impacting it against a huge business, and then doing whatever you possibly can to deliver. And this is where supply chains, etc., become absolutely critical. And perhaps the people that you never used to give plaudits to suddenly step up. You know, we've had an extra 1,000 cleaners come on our estate, and they're cleaning every day throughout the whole day. To be able to stand that up is a huge ask of a supply chain, but they've absolutely done it. So, yeah, I don't know if that helps answer some of that question.
Absolutely, yes, thank you for that. And Rob, I wonder if you can tell me about the transition to working from home, how that was managed at Dell, and also how the company is sort of planning to get people back in, perhaps in a phased way, I don't know. But yeah, if you could give us the private sector perspective on that, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, so literally globally, Dell locked themselves down quite quickly, and then we had to stand up. I think the count was about 120,000 employees to work from home, and that was incorporating a device, connectivity, and secure, basically. And I think one of the reasons why, I mean, obviously people would turn around and go, well, you're Dell, you should be able to do that, right? And I suppose the answer is yes, we should. But if you think about where Dell had come from over the last sort of 3 or 4 years with, you know, certain acquisitions, certain sell-offs, you know, our image wasn't overly the cleanest. It was quite big. But IT globally have done a phenomenal job to thin that out to be able to deliver our devices to a user's hands seamlessly without needing to come into an office. And that driver was already in play. And I think, and I've heard this from customers as well, turn around and said, well, all that really happened is the CV-19 came along and accelerated our motion to act quicker versus projects that maybe were in the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months time. That just all got shrunk right down and said, right, no, you will do nothing else apart from make that happen. And I think CV-19 did that, not just for Dell, but for many customers. From a return to work perspective, there's a couple of things that we're doing. Again, we've got obviously a global organization, so we've got a phase 1, 2, and 3 approach. Phase 1 is where basically your ID badges get turned back on because they were turned off. I found out the hard way by trying to get into one of our offices. Well, on day 1 of lockdown because I've forgotten something. So phase 1 is basically you can write to your local site facilities manager and director. They will say yay or nay, and it then incorporates 3 people basically: the facilities director, site VP, and HR. So they are aware of what you're coming in for and why. So at that point, they were allowing people to come in and get, say, their chair, or things that they didn't get to take because they forgot them, and so on and so forth. Phase 2, which is my local site here in Bracknell, is due to hit come the 1st of October at this moment in time, where we'll see people with roles that were needed to be in the office because of whatever the reason is. They would have been contacted. All the sites are laid out with one-way processes, with every other desk is in use. No more than 2 people in any conference room. All these sorts of little guidelines, just to remind people about the social distancing piece. And then phase 3 is obviously coming back to what the new norm might be. And I say what that might be is Dell have actually are in the process of waiting for all of our staff globally to fill out a quick survey. I think there were 4 or 5 questions on it. So like myself, I'm classified as a remote worker. I cover the whole of the UK and Ireland. Not so much Ireland at the minute physically, but we could make a change. If you were permanently based in an office and you prefer to be at home through that experience, you can now basically come back to Dell and say, I like this works for me. I'm okay with it. I don't need to be in an office or drive an hour to get there. So when I was referring to the ask the employee, we do eat our own medicine, and that process is happening now. And obviously, that does involve contract changes and so on and so forth from an in-house member of staff versus a remote worker around, some of the financial incentives for electricity, gas, and water, and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And what have you learned from your public sector clients about the way that they've adapted to new ways of working?
Varies dramatically. It was funny that Craig mentioned HMRC. I remember a couple of years ago they were out for tender, and they went almost 100% mobility. And I think there were a few people in the central government world looking at them with, did you have too many drinks last night when you decided that approach? But some would say now you look at that and go, well, that worked out really well for them, because they were able to just send their employees home. And I think it does vary within each type of government around some of the offices. If we look at the Met Police, for instance, over the last few years they've been trying to shrink down their office estate and make it all hot desking, and obviously now that's a real challenge to be able to do that. So like I said at the very beginning, I think the most common statement I've had from anyone, and not just specifically government, is what strategy we had is gone, and now we need to create a new one. And that really is the most common ground that I've seen from all customers. And even those ones that they thought they got it semi-right are still going, well, the future's still not right, and we need to look at that. And it's a massive review change now on what's next.
Yeah. All right, thank you for that. Want to move on now to talk about service delivery and that side of things. Craig, you mentioned sort of digitising services and the how that agenda has been accelerated, really. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and about kind of streamlining processes since the pandemic began?
I think what it's done is highlighted, well, to the point I was made before in terms of ripping up strategies. I mean, ultimately, the fact was there was a move towards more digital interactions and more telephony. What it's done is absolutely expedited it and seen what is possible. If I go back just even 6 months ago, just to give an idea, colleagues who were in the front of house area, so within job centres, wouldn't have had Surface Pros, because ultimately they were able to do their work using the computers that were on the desk. That's completely changed, and we're currently rolling out Surface Pros to thousands of those colleagues. What that allows us to do potentially then longer term is do more and more work within the community. So actually not necessarily always moving away from to be remote, but actually allow us to move into communities where perhaps we wouldn't been able to get to before, or move to or move with partners and actually work from partners' offices that we hadn't done previously. So there's a huge amount of work at the moment to look at what opportunities this brings us. The fact is, we know that face-to-face interactions are seen as the most effective at getting people back into work, and that being part, you know, to look at the government's agenda in terms of levelling up and being part of a community is absolutely critical to both the government's agenda and what we're doing. But it's about how you then use technology to increase that. You know, we're seeing from the stats that are coming through on things like unemployment, etc., that there's a large number of youth unemployment between age 18 to 24, 18 to 25, and clearly that age bracket are more au fait, happier to deal on a sort of digital basis, and therefore some of the work that we can do is really saying how can we get into that age group and make sure that they get the support they need. So there's two elements really. There's the political element, which is around making sure that we're levelling up and ensuring that we're in communities so that we don't create barriers by saying, you know, you can only communicate with us if you can get access to Zoom, or you can only access us if you've got access to a mobile telephone, because not all of our customers will be in that space. But similarly, also using that technology to actually get into areas that we previously hadn't been able to get into. So some of that, we've always done community work, but it gives us even greater flexibility to do things like that. So I think, you know, that move, that sort of channel shift to actually say, right now we've got this technology, what can we do? It opens up a huge number of possibilities. Perhaps by accident, but ultimately it's pushed us into a new way of working. But I'd say it's, you know, still very much in terms of making sure that we're face to face and interacting in the right way with people. But it allows us probably greater access and greater links into places that we previously hadn't had, where we had a more static model. So I think there's going to be some interesting. I think it'll be some interesting times over the next few years. We're at a point at the moment, which is known as sort of spending review. So we're putting in submissions to HMT for what, and each department are doing this, for what we would like to do over the next 3 to 5 years. And so what we'll be doing is using the technology that we've harnessed over the last few months and saying, well, this is what we'd like to do over the next 3 to 5 years, and giving clear benefits to customers. And hopefully revolutionising the way that we operate.
Okay, thanks for that. I want to talk a little bit more later on about sort of future and the changes that have been made that may become permanent. But first of all, you're talking about sort of face-to-face consultations and health assessments and those kind of things. And clearly, in order for the services to be accessible and inclusive, those had to keep going to some extent. How was that managed, and how quickly were you able to enable that to happen safely?
So certain services had to stop simply because of the number one priority was processing claims. So some of the sort of things that we were doing around, you know, working with employers, etc., had to go on the back burner because ultimately everyone's attention was focused on making sure that the most critical of our services were kept going. So that was part of what we had to do with our operation. But throughout all of it, you know, there's people who just cannot access, you know, some of our digital services and some of our telephony. So we've been keeping those buildings open. Again, this has been about impacting public health in real time. So we have links into Public Health England, we have links into HSE, we have links into government scientists, etc. We obviously sit on the boards that advise COBRA, etc. So we're well connected across government in terms of you know, the best practice, if you like. And so what teams were doing, whether it's our health and safety colleagues, people and capabilities, so HR colleagues, our sales and estates, digital, etc., were linking into those cross-government bodies and saying, right, what are people doing, and working at an answer. And so you often had people like the chief medical officer or something like that sitting on these bodies, providing guidance, providing advice, and then from that in real time taking that back into the department to then try and work out how we operationalise it. Because of course, you know, we're dealing with it here, but then you've got DFT trying to keep the transport system going, you've got HMRC trying to stand up a furlough scheme. You know, there's huge operations going on right across government, impressive stuff. And so having that access to the cross-government expertise to then take it back is how we kept it going. But we probably haven't done everything perfectly, but what we've done throughout it is iterate, you know, and communicate what we're doing. So, you know, at the very start, we opened up what we called a coronavirus hub on our intranet, and every single day there was communications going on there. But of course, that's just static. What we were doing as leaders is then trying to have all staff calls as much as possible, provide open forums, as I say, have hotlines so that people could phone up if they had particular questions or issues, and then try and work with leaders, because of course it's all well and good me sat here saying here's what you should do, but then when it actually comes to operationalizing it on the front line, it can often be a slightly different story. I think, you know, what I would say about most of the people, well, you know, the vast majority of people on our front line are pragmatic, strong individuals who know our customer base, work fantastically well, and what they'll do is make the best of the situation. So we'll provide them with as much kits as we possibly can. If it's not working, we'll get the feedback and then try and adjust accordingly. But if you work on the front line, if you work in a job centre, you're doing it just like an NHS health worker does it for the passion. They're doing it for the passion as well. So they're absolute, you know, in their mind, what is uppermost is the support for the customer. So the feedback we were getting from the front line was absolutely critical to say, right, we need this, we need that, and we would then try and operationalise it. The big key thing for us is then being able to try and make a consistent approach across 800 sites and get that supply chain going. So it's, you know, so someone saying get hand sanitizer. It's not simple, because you need the hand sanitizer in every single job centre right across the country, and you need to have that continuous supply. And supply chains, I think, you know, that they need a huge pat on the back, because what they had to do in terms of standing up that continuous supply at almost, you know, a moment's notice was absolutely extraordinary. So there's been a huge pressure, I think, on logistics. I think the point that was made earlier around wherever you can do digital and telephony, it has been what we tried to do at the start, to try and take the pressure off the supply chain. But as I say, there are some things that we had to do to make sure that we weren't endangering any of our most vulnerable customers, and therefore what we did was focused all the resources on that, whilst the other resource we sort of moved off onto other elements.
Thanks for talking us through that. Rob, coming back to you again, I'm interested in the private sector take on this. At Dell, obviously a lot of sales would have been done face-to-face before this coronavirus outbreak. How has the company adapted to doing things differently in order to keep staff and customers safe while building rapport with potential clients and with you know, keeping relationships going with existing ones?
Yeah, it's been a challenge for a lot, actually. A lot of our salespeople would rarely turn a camera on, let alone spend 8 hours a day in front of a camera on calls. So we had a lot of time and effort to work with people, to give them sort of 15-20-minute sessions on presenting through a camera on a regular basis. We then gave guidance around webcam management, right? So because I think you know, within day one, everyone's like, turn your cameras on, personalize, engage with your customers. It's hard work to do that for a long period of time, and what you'll find is lots of people will go and scan their email, or they'll look at a presentation, or maybe they're looking at sales figures. So there was notes around the correct manner to present or talk to customers over webcam. And one of the biggest things was, do not multitask, because the multitasking, again, is more draining. You're not concentrating. You're likely to not portray yourself in the right manner should you be wandering off to a secondary screen, or even another screen, should your customer be on webcam. So there was a lot of guidance from the business to train themselves up on the how to work virtually, and then right upwards, right? So we've been doing sessions around how to manage a team virtually, because again, normally all of our teams, whether it's sales, finance, legal, product supply, like or product like myself, we'd be getting together as a team minimum once a month face to face, you know, expressing our concerns, challenges, sharing ideas, amongst other things. You know, so a lot of teams introduced. We've got one. My team's got one on a Friday. It's the weekly wind down. Just to keep things lighthearted, we don't talk shop. It's mandatory to not mandatory, but if people want to bring a beer, they can bring a beer or whatever their pleasure is. Just to say, you know what, you've had, you know, how are you? And we've been doing that now since week 2 of lockdown. And again, a few of my colleagues, like I said before, live in small apartments, so it's been a real sort of lifeline for them. And then just extra guidance around, you know, do you know where your team members live, you know, and we started pairing up to reach out to people that were in that sort of situation. So I think if nothing, it was more about getting the guidance to know more about your business and know more about your colleagues. You know, don't get me wrong, there's 5,000 salespeople out there in Dell UK that are itching to be back in front of their customers. Some are. I know that our central government team actually are out and about quite regularly now over the last few weeks. The director of central government, Tarek, he's been out and about seeing some customers face to face, which is great. And we've got the guidance from above to say, you know, now it's down to your customers or your partners. If they are back and they're happy for you to come in under their guidelines, then you are okay to do so. We are on still strict lockdown on anything overnight, and we're on strict lockdown on anything flight related. That's to go up about 4 levels of sign off. So, but in country, in region, we're trying to get back out, because I think, you know, it's the basic of a human being, right? Is to interact, generally speaking, for most. And I think that's what everyone's missed. So hopefully we can contain this next round and not get back to a full lockdown.
Yeah. So you're sort of talking about the kind of social interaction there, obviously, and setting up calls between colleagues, sort of less formal calls. You know, how important has that been in terms of checking on people's well-being and mental health and that kind of thing?
I personally found it great. I think you know, the less professional calls. We had a desk yoga class that got booked up. That was interesting. I've learned that I've definitely got 2 left feet. Yeah, so there were all these just little ideas that came out, and just, you know, it's, yes, the message was, yes, we have a business to run, but, you know, your well-being and your mindset is and your health ultimately is the key element for us moving forward and getting to the other side. So it was, yeah, there's been some quirky ideas through music quizzes and others. So yeah, bit of fun.
Craig, I wonder if you could tell us about the wellbeing side at DWP, because clearly there's a huge uptick in demand for services and claims and things, and it must have been a very stressful situation for a lot of people. How was that managed?
Yeah, it's been a massive focus. We have a wellbeing team anyway within DWP, and it's been a huge focus. So there was a lot of stuff put centrally so people could use. I mean, more sort of generally, there's been a lot of work on things like mental health, first aiders, etc. But ultimately, it was adjusting that then to say, well, how do you do that through interactions through sort of Teams or through Skype, etc. Because actually, if you're working remotely, and this was the issue we had some people working remotely, some people working within job centres or service centres. So you have a sort of almost 2-tier operation, and at the same time so each person's probably suffering something slightly different. Some people suffering from anxiety, having to travel in each day, or with the concern, especially during March and April, when it really was sort of concerning figures coming out. And then you had other colleagues who were working at home, working from a bedroom or something like that, and being locked down for a long period of time. So I think people were suffering from different things. We did a number of different pulse surveys, which we broke down to directorate, gave out that information, and we were doing that in sort of rapid time. So we're doing that every other week. Huge numbers of responses. I think we had something like 60, 70,000 out of the 85,000 people responding. So we're then able to take that and start delving into some of those results quite quickly. So a big focus on well-being, and it was a big push from the sort of leadership perspective. And then more generally, I think the point that Rob's picked up about that sort of more informal approach was quite key. I think at the start, everyone had lots and lots of things in their diary, which were, meeting on this, and a meeting on this, and a meeting on this. But it becomes quite clear quickly that actually the things you miss the most are probably sat opposite someone having a quick chat, or grabbing a cup of tea and speaking to someone at a tea point, or whatever it is. Those are the things that you miss, not necessarily the sort of discussion on a day-to-day basis on a meeting. So it's about creating that space for people. And there's no easy answer, because it's quite difficult. And I think, as a sort of British personality trait, is we're not very good at sort of just have a quick chat and a catch up. But actually it's about encouraging that and saying that's just as important actually as creating some of that time for the meeting. So we've been focusing on that quite heavily. And then more generally, there's been people have really sort of come out with all sorts of different ideas. So, we've had quizzes, we've had people who really sort of taken to doing stuff on sort of mindfulness, etc. And actively trying to, encourage people to do it. From my own perspective, we have an estates team that are spread right across the whole of the UK, as you'd expect, because of our operation. And so we've been doing twice weekly calls. We've got blogs, we've got SharePoint where people can share, different ideas and share different experiences, etc. And also various different links to resources on things like mental health. And I think it's really brought out that discussion. I can't remember when it was. I think back in June, it had Mental Health Week, and there was a big push on that and making sure that resources come out. So I think that discussion has come out more generally. So people have been able to talk about it because it's been something that's in the news about the different effects on people, whether it's anxiety, whether it's a feeling of isolation or concern, etc. And so it's just been brought out naturally. But I think the big thing that comes out of all of this is you can speak to people on Teams, you can speak to people on Skype, but actually just having that sort of informal conversation is just as important. It creates the relationships and it makes you feel part of what's going on around you. That's slightly easier when you're in a physical place, but then you have the issues around things like anxiety and the worry because of all the stats and numbers that are pushed at you. And then I think it's about the support and reassurance. It goes back to that sort of comms message that you're not forgotten. We are thinking about the safety of you, and here are some other resources around sort of, mental health and anxiety, etc., that people can lock into.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for that. So yes, looking at the sort of technical aspects here, at DWP, with there being more emphasis now on accessing services online and through digital means and telephone and that kind of thing, what measures have been taken in terms of ID verification? How can people prove they are who they say they are?
That's beyond my brain power, unfortunately, but there was a huge amount of work that was done on that in the first few. So there'd been work previously around ID verification, etc. But overnight, digital colleagues and security colleagues worked heavily on that. And obviously, a big part of what we've got to do is prevent any fraud in the system, both fraud in terms of intentional, but also people entering something in incorrectly and mistakes being made. So there was a huge approach on ID. Previously, obviously, a large percentage of that would have been done face-to-face, and making sure that people physically had the ID. I don't know the specific IT changes that were made, but a large, and again, this goes back to the sort of speeding up of the process, a large shift was then made by security and digital in terms of actually then being able to verify ID, because it's a big part of what we do from a sort of fraud and error perspective, making sure people are getting what they need to get. But I don't know the specifics around that, unfortunately.
And Rob, with people continuing to work from home across the country and in many government departments, how can you ensure that they can do so effectively in terms of the equipment that needs to be rolled out, the hardware and the software? Getting IT systems to work as effectively as possible, and sort of reviewing systems and improving them as time goes on.
I think one of the most critical things that most people are reviewing and were reviewing, right, was how do we get our devices to our staff without it coming to IT, right? How do we automate that process? that journey's been on the run now for the last couple of years, and over the last few months, all that's really happened, like I said, the end goal of making that happen quicker has been accelerated to allow people the time to go and get what they need to get it done. So what tends to happen is we all get caught up in our day-to-day jobs, or we're traveling and so on and so forth. And I think what CV19 allowed IT to do was really home in and allow the people that needed to trim their image or reduce the applications that are on it to make that feasible, right, moving forward. That's now happened and happening. And I know for a fact that there's a few audience members where that's about to go live. In fact, that sort of zero touch deployment is a phrase that gets used a lot. And ultimately, it reduces costs, right? The more that you can do via the cloud or via an OEM's factory or a partner's staging warehouse, the less it will cost you as a customer. And that path and driver to what's the end goal? The end goal is that you're now driving a strategy that's identifying the right device. It's identifying the right accessories, right? Is it one screen, two screens, mouse, keyboard, backpacks, bundles? What's the right kit for your user? Then it's how we deploy it, right? So there's a fair few stages and steps that we need to go through with customers to make sure that they've got the right technological devices in the right hands of the right user.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. I'll go to a question from someone watching. What can be done to improve connectivity for those colleagues who are on slow broadband and mobile links at home? As there are current inequalities that need to be addressed for staff who don't have good links. What would you say on that?
Yeah, obviously we're not a telco company, but from personal experience and having done some work with this in a former life, I would always do a couple of things. I would look at let's just say it's a member of staff that was 100% in the office and never worked from home, okay? And all of a sudden they've now got to work from home. Chances are they don't have a paid for mobile by the organization. It's probably their own mobile. So I would double check what mobile phone company they're with, because ultimately, if they're in a poor region, they've probably done some research themselves already to get the best one. And I would then look at, even from a personal experience, I found that having my two kids at home, trying to homeschool them with some of the BBC stuff that was kicking about during lockdown, and I have pretty decent connectivity, the Wi-Fi signal simply wasn't good enough. So we plugged in an accelerator upstairs in the socket, and the boys were absolutely fine. So I think it's a bit of experimentation and talking to the user. Obviously you've got your boosters, right? You can get broadband boosters. Coming from a technical standpoint on the device, you need to look at the age, right? So Wi-Fi technology has changed quite dramatically over the last few years in its capability. Then also, I would double check the actual Wi-Fi push on the router itself, because a lot of the time, most of the telco providers will send and provide you the cheapest version of router in the market, not necessarily something that's going to push a decent quality signal. I know for a fact that the laptop I use today versus the one I had a couple of years ago wouldn't connect to Wi-Fi in my garden. My new one does. So yeah, there's a few things to check there, and then I guess the other thing is to get on and moan at the telco that's in your area to say, fix my signal. But from a technical standpoint, there's some little checkers there that you can do. So age of device, what's the router pushing out, and I know some of this might be above and beyond some home users, but there are some simple, nice little guide steps you can put together for them on how to do it. It's not overly difficult to check those sorts of things.
And going back to your presentation, you were talking about cybersecurity, and sort of connected to that, there's a question about data security. Where people are working from home, and especially when they're dealing with sensitive information, as a lot of people obviously in government departments are.
Yeah.
How can they make sure that sensitive information is protected? What IT systems and protocols do you need to have in place?
So So a lot of the government agencies have already deployed or are about to deploy Windows Hello. Okay, that's a huge helping factor. It's simple, right? Either you've gone down the road where you've bought a device with a camera that can do that facial recognition, or you've got a device that's got a fingerprint reader on it. That will allow that to be nice and secure. Making sure that anything network bound, so coming in the cloud, you've got two-factor authentication in place, whether it's a soft token or a physical one, absolutely critical. You know, and ultimately, you need to make sure there are a couple of steps involved, right? But not too overcomplicated for a user. So a simple PIN for accessing a code, a soft token off your laptop to be able to get to your organization's network, pretty much anybody can do. Looking into a camera or putting your finger on a fingerprint, with the way the world is today with your mobile phones, you should know that kind of process. My mum, bless her cottons, you know, she's tail end of her 60s now, but she knows how to get into a camera by looking at it. So, and hit the video button to phone her grandkids. So trust me, if she can do it, anyone can. But to keep it simple, and as far as the protection is, you know, do an audit, right? Make sure you're looking into your where your vulnerabilities might be. And when I say do an audit, you know, it's about looking at the products you've got. Sometimes antivirus type renewals can, and I see it quite common, they tend to be the thing that just gets, you know what, that's fine, just sign it off for another 3 years. You know, that's scary, right? Because you don't know how good that piece of product is. And have you gone to market to look at the technologies out there? And I mentioned AI earlier. You know, AI and security is huge, right? There are now products that will review algorithms as they're arriving, okay, and if it's out of place, it gets put into a quarantine environment until someone in IT looks at it. So there are some pretty impressive changes. Apologies, that's puppy. There are some fantastically good products out there in the market that you can tie into the purchase of the device. You can and remove the need to be able to go and renew somewhere else. And the other thing is education. Constantly educate your users. Short, sharp sessions. So we have, within Dell ourselves, we have certain protocols that we have to go through every quarter. And they're literally 15, 20 minutes long, if that. But it's just that constant reminder, don't forget. And I mentioned my colleague about the PO. She hasn't lived it down yet. You know, it was one character difference in the customer's email, and she was expecting a PO at the time, and the PO came through, and yeah, her machine shut down straight away because IT said no. So educate, rinse and repeat, and keep it short and sweet.
All right, thank you. So I think we've got about 5-10 minutes left. So I'll go on to questions sort of looking ahead to the future of work and government estates and that side of things. Craig, I mean, you mentioned that DWP has sort of taken space in buildings from other departments because you've needed that extra capacity and those extra people to deliver services. So in that way, it may be different to a lot of other government departments which are currently sitting largely empty, I would imagine. But how do you think this will unfold in the sort of medium to long term? You know, once demand for services starts to go back down to a normal rate at some stage, what effect do you think that might have on the estate and the buildings, the number of buildings that are needed?
Well, longer term, I mean, there's two huge government estate strategies, so cross-government estate strategies. One which is places for growth, so moving stuff out of London and Whitehall into the regions, and that will continue to build sort of hub regions right across the UK, and making sure that departments are linked up in that, so that, you know, you don't have a DWP building 2 miles down the road from an HMRC building, if actually it makes sense to bring them together and drive some efficiencies. So that will continue, there's no doubt about that. And the second element is around utilisation of space and ensuring that actually we get the greatest value for money. So, you know, making sure that the spaces that we are used are smart for smart working, that they're, you know, set out in a way that, yes, people can do some work from the desk, but actually, you know, the reason for these hub locations are ultimately to interact, etc. So I'd imagine that there'll be a continuation of that, a continuation of rationalising the estate and moving out to the regions. As I say, there's a sort of second aspect to DWP, which is that actually it needs to be within its communities to deliver its services. Similar would be something like the NHS, needs to be in its communities. So there's going to be two different types of estate if you see forward, one which is more operational and actually in the communities providing a service, and then the second, which is more of your processing and corporate functions, which you can see ultimately moving into, being rationalised. And then the type of space that you see in there ultimately being changed to reflect the current ways of working, which is, I suppose, working in meeting rooms, collaboration space, rather than necessarily sat at a desk writing something up, which you could do at home. So I see that sort of trajectory continuing over the next few years, because that's the position that we've always been in. So as I said before, your back of house, your sort of service centres, your corporate centres going in one direction, but at the same time, I still see a focus on making sure that we're within the communities that we serve.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. We had a question in about government property agency and sort of moving people out of sort of core city locations. So hopefully that answers that one as well.
I was just looking at it about the properties, but there's also about the government strategies. Just on that, because it's happening live, I've actually there's over the last few months, from a Dell Technology perspective anyway, there's been lots of talk about trying to harmonise some round tables and talk to what's going well, what's not going well, and this was pre-COVID, right? So we're actually looking to start looking how we can create maybe some of these round tables where we give the access to multiples of customers in the same verticals, the chance to share ideas, to share platforms, to share the good, the bad, the ugly, and then obviously then maybe talk about some set criteria around those obstacles, of any trends that we see in the industry as well. So just to say that yes, I do believe that shared strategies will become more apparent in the future for sure.
All right, great. I think we've just about got time for one last question. Craig, I'll come to you on this first. DWP has shown that it's been able to continue delivering services throughout the pandemic despite a huge uptick and having to adapt very quickly to changing working practices. Of the changes that have been introduced over the last few months, which are likely to become permanent, do you think?
I think so. Increased use of things like this, so increased use of collaboration tools, I think will be absolutely going forward the thing that happens. I think there'll be greater scrutiny on the reasons for travel in the future. Why are you traveling? That's ultimately dead time if you can be doing, working remotely. So I think that will be a greater focus. I think from a buildings perspective, I think the focus that we've seen on things like, and it sounds very parochial, but I think it's absolutely critical, the focus that we've seen on things like cleaning, sanitisation, etc., I think will continue, because I think it's got a great focus. I don't suddenly see that hand gel and hand sanitizers and all those types of things will just suddenly fall away. So I think that, some of the supply chain and consumables that we probably didn't use as much in the past will become critical to, what you'd expect in a normal building. So I see some very practical, I suppose, changes happening. And then I think on the other element, I think, as I say, a reduction in travel, people really questioning why they're going to a meeting when they could do it by Teams or by Zoom or whatever it will be, and a real focus on time and what gives the greatest value in terms of time, whether it's travel. If there genuinely is a reason to go face to face, then go for it. But I think there'll be even greater pressure on justifying that sort of the thing that we probably didn't put much of a value on before, which is just the time that it takes to getting into an office, and that will become even more critical, I think.
Mm-hmm. And Rob, more broadly, do you have a sort of a perspective on a lot of the changes that have been made in many companies and which ones might stick?
Yeah, I'd agree with what a lot of Craig said. I don't think, if you look at our friends out in the Far East, masks have been the norm for many years. I think that's here to stay. for the foreseeable, if not forever, in public crowded places such as buses and tubes and so on and so forth. I think to Craig's point, the hand sanitizer thing is going to be the new norm for sure. From a working perspective, definitely, we will have more people working from home, without a doubt. And this is my but, though. My biggest but is it needs to be the right people. Okay, I don't think anybody can take a blanket approach to saying you are now working from home. Okay, because that's not going to work, because it's not right for everybody. I know personally, because of my role and the amount of travel that I did do, because of the amount of variety of people that I need to see, I found it really difficult. The first sort of 4 weeks it was like someone just turned a light switch off, where I was traveling. I almost had to learn how to live at home, if I'm honest, with a wife and 2 kids around me 24/7. So it was a challenge, but we're learning, and I think going back to my earlier statements around making sure you talk to your employees, that's absolutely critical. But it will be we will be spending more time at home, and I think as long as you get the balance right, it's all great. But I'm not so good at getting the balance right sometimes. I'm a bit of a victim of sitting in my chair for too long, but I take that on the chin. That's nothing to do with who I work for. Yes, the new puppy hopefully will get me out and about a bit more and get away from the dog.
All right. Okay, so we're out of time. Thank you very much to Rob and Dell Technologies, to Craig, and of course to you, the audience. We really hope you found the webinar insightful and useful. We'll be emailing you with a link to a recording of the webinar and to a write-up outlining the key points that have been discussed today in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, Mia. It was great, and all the best.
Thank you very much. Cheers.